All right, we'll do this again soon, guys.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Leave.
All right.
Bye.
So long. Bye-bye.
Oh, okay. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. I just got out of a heated debate over women, the most controversial subject in politics.
Yeah, uh, just women always messing things up, right? Just
Not
always,
what we
yeah,
do,
yeah, unbelievable.
what we're wired to do. All right. I'm just getting you on my screen over here. This is Stardust on twitch.tv,
Also on YouTube, Stardust
also on
streams.
YouTube.
Yeah.
So what's going on? What did you want to chat about tonight?
So yeah, I wanted to talk more. We had briefly touched on the subject of whether you thought that Islam was like fundamentally incompatible with Western culture. And I guess I wanted to kind of like have more of a conversation about that. By the way, do you think you'll have your camera on for this?
Oh yeah,
Or
let me figure that out. My editor quite accurately told me I was being lazy and selfish to never turn on my webcam for people's shows that I joined.
that's fine.
So let me sort this out.
No problem.
I think I can do it. It takes me a minute every time because I'm just absolutely challenged. Turn on camera. Can you see me now?
Yeah, I can see you. Yeah.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect.
That looks great, actually. I should just make that full screen.
Amazing.
Okay. All right, yeah. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that. I thought it was interesting. And I guess I wanted to kind of get your opinion on where that came from initially. Like what made you believe that?
What made me think that Islam is incompatible with Western culture?
Yeah.
I mean, beyond like the basic stuff, like having completely different legal principles of treatment of women, how we should respond to crime, the religious belief being something that has blasphemy laws, behavior laws that are just contradictory to Western culture. I like, to me, it seems like a really basic thing. And I've spent all this time in my life sitting around trying to debate with people over why Islamic culture and Western civilization are incompatible. Not to say that, people that are Muslim can't have their own countries and cultures. They absolutely can. But it's always seemed fairly obvious to me that when you have one culture that demands you can't blaspheme against this religion, you can't talk bad about it, or you're going to be hung, you can't partake in certain liberal qualities, or you're going to be hung. And this is like a crazy thing for me to be arguing too, right? Because a lot of like the LGBTQ stuff, the feminism stuff, that tends to be progressive values, although they are progressive values that are allowed within Western culture because we believe in a free culture. Islam is completely contradictory to. In many cultures where they implement Sharia law, they'll hang people for partaking in these behaviors. To me, that just screams obvious incompatibilities when you look at it in practice, which we can all over the place in Europe, especially where there's been mass Muslim immigration. You just see cultural silos created within countries. There's no integration. They create a country within a country. You have places like Marxloh in Germany. You have certain neighborhoods in the UK.
Yeah. So if I were going to, I guess, visit some of these points one by one, I guess you brought up blasphemy. And I can definitely agree that I'm like very close to being a free speech absolutist, right? I think that's maybe one area where I'll, tend to diverge with a lot of people on. I'm pretty free speech absolutist, and I think that but I don't think that people who follow Islam are necessarily any more anti free speech than people who are super religious of other faiths, right?
Are there any countries that are like you could point to that are Christian countries that will hang you for the crime of blaspheming the Christian faith?
I would have to look into that. I don't I can't off the top of my head think of anything like that. But
Hmm.
I mean, again, there are protests that happen like every few months, whenever something that is blasphemous towards Christianity comes out in media. Protests will erupt. I remember when that movie Dogma came out a while ago. There were protests all over the United States because of that
But
movie.
the thing is, within a liberal society, protest is also a liberal value,
Yeah,
right?
protest is a
So
liberal value.
whereas beheading someone is not.
Oh yeah, no,
Killing
beheading
someone
somebody
for
is
the
not.
crime of criticizing Islam is a very different thing from protesting within a liberal society, which is actually pro-liberal Western values. Everyone should be
Sure,
protesting
but
when they feel something is a political problem to
do you
them.
think if it were up to some of these people who were Christians who were protesting, like the freedom of speech to, to speak against Christianity or even speak against Judaism, do you think if it were up to them, they would maybe put some law that at least fined people uh, for engaging in that?
Um, no, because most of these Western nations with free speech values were founded by Christians. It was like Protestants that came into the US and were mass influence on the government and religion. Like most of the free speech cultures were Christian cultures, specifically because Christianity is based on free choice. You know, you aren't forced to submit to Christ. You are told to accept him into your heart. And that is like the main value. When God had Adam and Eve in the garden, he gave them the opportunity to eat of the tree of good and evil and gave them that free choice because he didn't want a love that was forced upon them. So that it's like an inherent quality within Christianity to have the freedom to choose good or bad for your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think you see a lot of free speech oriented cultures come about from Christian backgrounds.
I don't know. I think that there are a lot of Muslims who value the same type of liberal democratic values that a lot of Christians do. And while sure some of these values may have come originally from Christian like foundation, uh an integral part of that was the freedom to practice whatever religion you want. Right now, I'm not
Mhm.
disagreeing with you that things like Sharia law are things that are not going to be compatible, but there is writing within the Quran and there's even like advocacy within Islam today where they say you have to follow the law of the land. Right? It doesn't matter if you are living, whether you're living in an Islamic country or if you're living in a Western country, the country that you're living in, you have to follow the law of the land there. That's pretty much part of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, like there are obviously different sects of Islam, some of which are more compatible with Western culture and some of which are not. Like if you look at Sufism, which tends to be a more spiritual understanding of the Quran, so all of these battles when it talks about bloodshed or fighting the non-believers or whatever, they see this all as a spiritual war, which is far more compatible with Western culture than some of the more extreme sects. But the problem is that extreme sects, and I'm not even saying extreme as like a judgment on them, it's just a reality, right? They are ones that apply what they read as their religious principle within practice, and that practice is simply not compatible with Western practice of law and civilizational compatibility, right? So it's not even like a condemnation or a saying they're a worse culture, it's just saying they're an incompatible culture, and it tends to be these more extreme religious sects that do run the cultures and countries of a lot of these Islamic nations, and which promote and prompt the wider cultural opinion. And thus, when you have people migrating from these countries, they tend to retain those views when they come to the new Western countries, and they don't mesh well. And yeah, there are individuals that will be exceptions to that, but it doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater and ignore the rule and ignore the problems that the rule proposes.
Okay, so I guess what I would say is sure, people who come from other countries are going to carry their values that they took from those cultures with them, right? But then I would not ascribe that to even the religion. I would ascribe that to the regional culture, right? We know the regional culture is like very
But
different
the
from the
regional
religion.
culture is informed by the religion because a lot of these countries are religious states. They're not
Sometimes,
states
but if we're
based on
talking about
simply the
FGM,
political.
we're talking about something like FGM. FGM is not something that is specifically an Islamic thing, and when it's practiced in certain parts of Africa, it's practiced by Muslims and by Christians. So there are like no doubt there are cultural practices that people will bring over, or cultural beliefs that people will bring over about like the status of women in comparison to men, that I have issue with too. But I again would not really attribute that so much to the religion as I would to like the regional culture that they're coming from.
Sure. I mean, whatever you want to me, it doesn't really matter so much as the acknowledgement of the fact that there are other cultures that aren't compatible with our own. That's most important to me. If you want to sum it up to the politics of a country, if you want to sum it up to the culture of a country or the religion of it, just the plain acknowledgement that there are cultures that aren't compatible with each other is what's most important to
There are
me.
cultural practices, I would say, that are incompatible, but I think that a lot of people can be integrated. It only takes like a generation or two for people once they've
Not
come over.
not
So
if they're moving into communities that are entirely the culture they were leaving, right? That's what's become. So like Canada, we consider ourselves not a melting pot like the United States. We consider ourselves a mosaic, a cultural mosaic. So we don't have one kind of group that is Canadian. And this is once again the government's opinion of what Canada should be, not mine. I don't like the mosaic idea. But instead of mixing everyone into the same idea, the same language, the same kind of goal and trajectory, we're all our own little silos. And because of that, what's happened is these silos don't communicate. And as certain silos grow, other silos shrink. And I think we have taken for granted the fact that there were certain pieces of this mosaic that were larger, that were actually what we based the foundation of our country on, which would have been Christian, European ethics previously from where, England, where Canada and our politics were based from. We still technically have the Queen as our head of state. And as that part of the mosaic shrinks, we actually lose what it is to be Canada as the other parts of the mosaic take it over and consume it. So I think that's what needs to be considered.
would that just would that just wouldn't that just be like more of a fault with the country for not having like a good integration system? Like
Yeah, absolutely.
America's really good at it, I feel. There's like it's hard to, with the exception of like ghettoization, which is something that's historical that's happened, but integration still is something that's like really really good in America, and I think people are kind of forced to live amongst each other in America, and as a result, it doesn't really matter what culture you come from, you kind of end up integrating regardless.
Once again, that's not necessarily true depending on where you come from, because there are these cultural enclaves that have formed as a result of mass immigration. Immigration itself isn't a problem. I've never had a problem with it. Because typically if someone moves to an area where they don't speak the language, everyone around them is acting a different behavior, they'll assimilate necessarily, because that's what humans like to do. They like to get along with their community. They like to be able to run a business, and in order to do that, you have to be able to get along with the people around you, communicate with them. So all of these things necessarily happen when you're an immigrant moving into an area that is entirely different from you. But when you're an immigrant moving into an area of a country that is essentially conquered land, because everyone is exactly like you, like the country you came from, speaking the same language as you, same religion, same race, same all of these things, because they've created a silo within a different country that might as well be a copy paste of the old country you came from. There's going to be no integration that happens, and that's what's being created. If you speak to anyone in Canada or British Columbia, where I was born, and you ask them what's an Asian neighborhood, what's a white neighborhood, what's an Indian neighborhood, they'll be able to name them on the tip of their tongue, because it truly has become basically miniature separate countries within a wider country, and that has been very destructive.
But people, I don't know about countries, but I definitely can see neighborhoods, but people still leave those neighborhoods and mix with the rest of their communities.
They leave them sometimes, but the people they do business with, the people they marry, the people they communicate with are all within those communities. So that means the people that they're tightest social bonds with are within those communities. I remember visiting Marxloh in Germany, which is basically a Turkish neighborhood, and every single flag flying off every wall, every car, it was all the Turkish flag. And you couldn't hear a single person speaking German. And the only thing I could think in my head was if Germany and Turkey ever went to war, what would Marxloh do? They sure as hell wouldn't be on the side of Germany. And whether you want to acknowledge it right now or just fob it off as not a current problem, that is a problem.
I guess that's kind of more of relating to your, I think I saw you ask a question at one point of somebody, like if they're Muslim first, or if they're or specific nationality first, right? But what you're describing, like even within these neighborhoods, the neighborhoods with themselves have different religions in them, right? And even those neighborhoods themselves require to have like some of their shops in English at least, right? And to do certain things like get like cell phone service and get like do banking things, like
No, you'd think so, but you'd think so. But
there's at least one step along the way that would be in English.
If you go to certain neighborhoods, even here in Canada, which is wild, you'll be told we don't serve your kind in certain like Asian neighborhoods. Especially like, as a white person, you'll be told that sometimes, but especially if you're black, there's a lot of racism against black people in China and a lot of Asia. So it's like maybe unless you're living it, it's really easy to critique and say it's not a problem from afar when we're looking above and we're not seeing the individual day to day of the people that actually have to exist within these neighborhoods. But when you're in them, when you're living them, I mean, I even grew up I went to a school that was largely Asian when I was younger and not when I was in high school. And I'd have people speaking Chinese around me all the time. And it made me feel uncomfortable, not because they were Chinese, but the fact that I couldn't even understand or communicate with the people around me. Like that's a pretty basic aspect of being human and being able to connect with another individual, right?
Right. So this idea of certain neighborhoods not even serving people of different ethnicities sounds just sounds wild to me, because I thought
It's wild.
Canada's one of these places where they working on like laws against like mispronouncing people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it's really wild, the fact that this is happening and our care is about whether you call someone a they, them. It blows my mind every single day that we've got entire communities that are siloed from each other, but we're more worried about people's special pronouns.
So somehow Canada simultaneously has laws that prevent you from mispronouncing people, but also doesn't have laws that prevent, or doesn't have enough like policing that would or laws that would prevent people from discriminating based on race.
Well, you'd have to be someone that would go to the Human Rights Commission and report it and go through the whole process. You'd have to care enough, and a lot of transgender activists do care enough to do that. I think the average white person or whatever that gets rejected from shopping at an Asian store in frickin' Richmond or something, they're not going to care that much. When it comes to the actual, I mean, we don't have enough police to be enforcing just basic laws. We have like 3,000 break-ins a day in Vancouver for car break-ins, and the police don't even follow up on them anymore because there's just so much crime they can't keep up. So it's like the idea that they'd be out here enforcing all of these social issues that when they can't even keep up with the actual crime is a bit
denying service to anybody in Canada is a human rights violation. So you're saying that somebody, if somebody is denied service, they have to go and they have to like file a report for it to be addressed.
You have to go file a report. It has to be heard. It has to be this and that.
If it's this much of a problem that it's like widespread, I feel like there would be people going and making reports.
It's not this much of a problem because the communities just choose not to mix because of experiences like that.
So, okay. So
Like if you're
can't
if you go to certain neighborhoods, you just won't see any white people. If you go to certain schools in Surrey, you just like I think Gruananak Temple area in Surrey is like 80%
it
Indian, and you're
makes no
just not going to see
sense
a
to me
white kid
though.
there.
You would just that would be not only are you denying like a human you're denying a human right, you are like impacting your business monetarily. It makes no monetary sense for somebody to deny service based on anything like that. Especially
Um,
knowing like especially if you know, if there are I don't know, like that it just seems like you're cutting yourself
Maybe it
off.
doesn't, but there's also like for me, I when I've gone to these because I've gone to these areas, and I was almost going to do a story on it at one point when I was younger. It does kind of make monetary sense to some degree, especially when a lot of these immigrant communities are not paying taxes. They do cash only. They're kind of relying on the fact that it's only local community members engaging with their businesses, and they don't want outsiders there because a lot of them are quite frankly violating tax law and whatnot. It actually is completely reasonable that they wouldn't want outsiders in their communities.
How are they avoiding tax laws?
The you'd have it's so hard to explain the nuances of like day-to-day interactions in a political sense because these aren't things that are like studied in books or necessarily reported on in media. But you know, you go to certain neighborhoods that are like high immigrant areas, and they're only doing cash transactions. They're only doing transactions in a way that they won't have to
Cash transaction doesn't mean
report.
that they don't have to report income though, right? That's kind of like a jump, right?
Right.
There are plenty of cash only businesses that have existed like for
I'm
decades
just I'm
that
just saying
people still have to
there are
report
businesses that
taxes.
are operating on more of a on a less legit
So it's an
level, and it's
assumption then.
easier.
It's not
It's not, no, it's not an assumption. This is just very true. Like it happens everywhere. It doesn't matter what race you are, but it's just easier to engage with people that are community members or people that you know. And this happens in all communities, you know, the white English speaking community too, doesn't matter, where it's just easier to work with people that you know are within your own community than to deal with outsiders.
Okay, so I guess a couple of things is how do you know that these cash only businesses are are not reporting incomes like they should be? And how do you
Like
know
I'm
that
sorry, I don't know how you. This isn't just like common sense. This happens all the time with every business. Like,
it
have you
can
ever gone into a
happen? It
nail
can happen,
salon
but
and
it's
been
not a
told cash
necessarily
only
okay, so it can happen, but it's not
because
necessarily
there's no paper
true.
trail?
It's not necessarily true in every instance though, right? It can
No, of
happen,
course
but
not. Not in every
there
instance,
are
but that's
plenty
just
of
one.
bars. There are plenty of
That's
bars in
just one
DC.
example.
Okay, so there are plenty of bars in DC that operate cash only. They still have to report their income. The cash only is
And
like
you
a
report a
convenience
much lower
thing.
income than what you actually make when you're doing cash only. But this is just one example of that. Others are literally, I think another big aspect is just the fact that there's a language barrier, and they don't want a lot
Do
of people that speak a different.
their children don't learn the language of the country
Well,
when they go
I
to
mean,
school?
if their kid is at school or like 13 or something, they're not going to be operating the business, and maybe they will learn the language, but they'll probably spend most of their time within these siloed communities. I mean, they
Yeah.
even found when it came to religious radicalization, it was actually the second generation within the UK that were more radical than their parents' generation that moved there when it came to Islamic radicalization. And I think part of that is because there's like a lack of cultural identity. There's nothing actually to assimilate into left in these countries, and people require identity. They want to know who they are. They want to know what their purpose is. They want to know what their morality is, what comes in the afterlife. These are conversations the West don't have because we just leave it open to diversity as our strength. Our identity comes from all of these other people that come into our countries and bring their identities. So of course, the younger
I
people are
don't
going to latch
necessarily
on to
think
their
that. I
past
think
identity.
this is like look, I think an identity sure is very important, but I think the way that the US does it, it is a diverse country, and one thing you can know about the US in comparison to other countries is that you can't look at anybody, or you can't like envision what an American is supposed to look like, right? An American can be of any ethnicity, any gender, any religion, right? That's generally how you should see an American, right? But that doesn't mean that the person doesn't have common values with another American, right? Regardless of ethnicity, regardless of gender, age, whatever. People still value liberty. They still value freedom of speech. They still
Do they?
value the
I don't think
tenets of
everyone that immigrates to
democracy.
America does. I don't
A
think everyone that
lot of the
immigrates to
people who
Canada does.
do immigrate to America do, but that's kind of the national identity of an American, right? So that is the identity that kind of takes over people. And when people take their citizenship, you'll see like the most proud people getting
There
their
are
citizenship.
people like that, and they're good immigrants. There's a lot of illegal immigration too. I think what happened, there was a point where people did move to countries because they respected the liberty. I know, like my family that came from Denmark to Canada, when they signed their oath to become Canadian, I still have it. It literally says, like, you are being accepted into this country that respects your free speech, that respects your religious freedoms, that respects all of this. And they would have loved that. And the one thing they said when they moved in, even though they were living in someone's garage and barely had anything, they were like, we will not speak a stick of Danish in this household, or garage rather. You guys are going to become Canadian. You're going to learn the language here. You're going to learn the culture. You're going to become a part of it. And they were damn proud to do so and work their asses off to get there. But now I think because how large our social systems have become in the West, the primary motivation isn't necessarily the liberty to move to these countries, but a primary motivator is the economic viability of moving, whether it be support systems available or just jobs available, quite frankly. And I'm not saying that's a bad reason to immigrate. A lot of people immigrate just because there's job opportunity, economic upward mobility, and that's fine. But that means that their primary focus isn't necessarily going to be the cultural, their love of the culture they're going into. And
that can be the case in other
countries. Yeah, go ahead.
That can be the case in other countries, but in America, at the very least, like America has like this cultural domination everywhere, right? People learn to be American before they even set foot inside America. Like I had cousins in India who would know all about American culture before they even had stepped foot in America. And there are people that there are people who are taking these citizenship tests, and even though they might speak one language at home, that doesn't mean they don't learn another language. They don't learn English and use English when they interact with the broader society. The identity of American is not tied to your ethnicity or to your religion. It's tied to that national identity, that same patriotic pride, and that anybody can work hard enough and like achieve something, that anybody can kind of like grind away for however long it takes, and
the American dream, whatever
pretty
it
much,
is,
yeah. And then the values of liberty, freedom of speech, these are things that people still value regardless of background.
Some people. I don't disagree with you. There are amazing immigrants that come to Canada. There are amazing immigrants that come to America. But when people talk about the problems of immigration, I think it's pretty. I mean, maybe I need to make it more obvious. We're not talking about those people. When we look to Europe, when we look to certain neighborhoods that I've grown up around, it's not even necessarily a problem with their culture. It's not that they have a different culture. It's that different culture isn't the culture of the country they're coming to. I don't have a problem with other countries with different values and different laws existing. And I don't even think they're lesser. Maybe if you asked me like 5 years ago, I would have said they're lesser, but not now. They're different is what I would say. And they're not compatible with some of the laws and rules we have here. And it's not the immigrants that you're talking about where they learn to become American before they even come to America. They love it. They want to be a part of it. There's nothing more they want than to speak English and open a language in America and say they're a damn patriot and, throw up flags on the 4th of July. Those people are great, but that's obviously not the people that I'm talking about.
So it seems like, but again, if we're going back to the original topic, I guess, like it just doesn't seem like it's accurate to say that it's particularly an issue with Islam or any religion. I find a lot of Abrahamic faiths are equally bad in a lot of these categories, whether it's like attitude towards homosexuality, LGBTQ people, women. There are a lot of religions that just don't have the best views, don't have the most tolerant views. But when it comes to Islam, like again, one of the fundamental things is they have to follow the law of the land. I would say it's more of like a regional culture issue, and I do have issues with cultures that put women in a more secondary status than Western culture does. Uh, but I still don't see how Islam is somehow so much more unique than any other religion that, you know.
I mean, once again, the reason that I would say it is unique, as much as I don't like, I've got Muslims I know that are very thoughtful people that I think practice their faith in a really meaningful way and have a lot to add to the world. This isn't even necessarily like a critique of like, oh, I hate all Muslims. But it's not that. It's literally just about cultural compatibility and how immigration will affect a nation. And when you talk about, I don't see how Islam is unique, I think it goes back to that question I asked you at the beginning of this conversation. Well, what Christian nations can you point to where they're throwing gay people off roofs? And you can't point to any because they don't exist.
No,
Whereas
at
there are
some point,
multitudes of Islamic countries that exist doing that exact
right.
behavior.
There were points in history where Christian nations were less progressive than Islamic nations, for sure.
Right, we're at our point in history,
And
right?
our point
We're
in
discussing
history,
our
our point in history, sure. Our point in history, there are Muslim nations where what you're describing is true, but there are also Muslim nations where what you're describing doesn't happen. There are Muslim nations where there are slightly more moderate beliefs. And there are nations in which there's a huge Muslim population where the Muslim population isn't enforcing their beliefs on the rest of the country. If anything, like you can look at India again as an example of there are places in India if you're suspected of eating beef, they'll use that as an excuse to lynch somebody, right? And
right,
that's
and
more
we
of
don't
like
want those people immigrating to a culture where we like our beef and steak, right? Because they're not going to be culturally compatible with said, different ideas.
Right, then we can look at somebody who practices FGM who's a Christian in some part of Africa and say the same thing about them, right?
Sure, and we probably don't want them immigrating either.
Yeah, but wouldn't it? I feel like it would be better at the same time too. So I mean, again, I think that kind of reiterates my point, though, right? It's not necessarily Islam. It's quite literally the regional culture. And
Sure.
at the same time, I would say that like by exposing more women in these areas to more progressive values, we're actually like doing good for them, right?
Once again, this goes back to like I don't care if it's referred to as the local culture or the local religion. Like I'm not going to be nitpicking that. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that we create societies that are strong, in which communities thrive, in which people can communicate with one another, in which they can love each other and have the same goals. And when people can't, like, people have enough, you think about like personal relationships, people, when they speak the same language, when they've been raised the same way, the same religion, they have enough trouble just managing their own personal relationships among people groups that are almost identical to them. The idea of managing these relationships on a mass scale in a country with a bunch of people that disagree with them on every single aspect of their morality, religion, cultural upbringing, and language, not even speaking the same language, that is
But it's
the
not
most
even
obvious red flag for a country I've
right.
ever seen. And I think
But
it
it's
should be
not
so
even
obvious,
they're not
progressive
even
or right wing, that you should be against that.
they're not even disagreeing on every aspect, though, right? Like you can look at surveys of Muslims within America, and majority of them have voted and have expressed like very strong democratic values. Like 30% of them are now like accepting of homosexuality. It's still less than the general public, but it is slowly becoming more accepting.
Okay, so let's say that Muslims became the majority in America, and only 30% of them supported LGBTQ values. What do you think would happen in America?
Well, it wouldn't happen overnight, right? By the time
so
something like that
even
happened, by the time something
you're in your own, in the same breath, while you're talking about this issue, you're kind of agreeing with me, because you're saying, look, it's possible to change their culture. We can assimilate them. So you're basically agreeing that you can't have them come in with the culture they brought from their previous country. You have to convince them and assimilate them to your own country.
But,
and that's
there
a
are
good
tons of
thing. Even if it's
Christians.
only 30%, we want it to be 100%. I'm saying, great, we want to do that. You have to do it in a trickle manner. You have to have people immigrate slowly and not in mass amounts if you
All
want
right,
to do
it's
that assimilation, which you
39%.
yourself has said is good.
Yeah, so it's 39% say that it should be accepted. And that's in 2011, right? But even then, America itself wasn't accepting of homosexuality for the longest time until recently. We only recently made gay marriage legal, right? And there are still some places where like sodomy is illegal, right? So I think that
Wait,
even if even if
when you talk about sodomy, sometimes the law means sleeping with animals. Is there a state in America where it's illegal to have gay sex?
it might be the distinction that you're talking about.
Yeah,
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 I just know that there are a couple of states that have that. But
yeah. But
but
it's not talking about
regardless.
homosexuality.
Okay. Well, regardless, I would still say that even if, right, let's say like 40% of Muslims are accepting of homosexuality, and somehow overnight we got majority of the country to be Muslim, or majority of the country like had we had a huge influx of like Muslim people, the law of the land is still the law of the land, right?
Yeah, but
And
okay, right, but you
and they
don't want to
still
have
have
to
to follow
be.
the law of the land. That's still a
No, they don't,
fundamental
because people don't.
practice. That's a fundamental
Laws exist.
practice.
Laws exist to be broken. There are a million laws that exist that people don't listen to all the time, and you're going to get more and more of that, and just overwhelm and swamp your policing systems to the point where in parts of France and parts of Sweden, they don't even enforce the law in
But
some
it's
of these
not even
neighborhoods
about
anymore
religion at
because
that
they've
point.
got their own enclave and they've basically created their own laws in these neighborhoods. They call them no-go zones, where the police just throw their hands up and they're like, nothing we can do about it. It's so different from the standards we have in our day-to-day culture in France that we can't even go in there and deal with it anymore.
Okay, so again, I would say that that's not even related to the religion at that point. When the religion itself is saying that you have to follow the law of the land, that is not an issue. Then, if people are breaking the law, that is an issue with the regional culture, with the people, the
That's
individuals
fine.
themselves, right?
That's
And
fine.
also,
Like I said this whole
Texas
time, I don't
Attorney
care if you want
General
to call it regional
apparently.
culture or religion. Both work.
Okay, Texas Attorney General apparently wants to make gay sex illegal or something like that.
Okay, well, it's
But
not.
yeah, yeah, no, I would just say that again, like I don't, even if we, and I'm somebody who's like an atheist, right? I'm ex-Muslim. I'm not even like a current Muslim. But I don't, even if like the majority of America became Muslim overnight, or we had this influx of people from these different cultures, if they're religious Muslims and they're following the scripture, they have to follow the law of the land. I'm not so concerned about them being Muslim as I am concerned about them coming from more misogynistic cultures.
Okay, that's fine. I'd agree. You know what? The Muslim thing, we just throw that out the window. It doesn't matter. The local culture, if you want to call it that,
Mhm.
that still presents I mean, once again, in the same breath, you said you're concerned about that as well. It still presents the same problem of allowing mass immigration from places which views are antithetical to the views of your own country and culture.
Sure, but that doesn't mean that, so there are going to be certain aspects of these cultures that are obviously things that we don't want, practiced in our countries, right? Very, very obviously, like, anything that is, anti-woman, I wouldn't want, being enforced in our country. But it doesn't mean that every aspect of their culture is going to be incompatible, right? Sure, there are going to be specific parts of their culture that are like fundamentally incompatible, but there are going to be other parts that are compatible. So
Sure, but the reason we're talking about the incompatible parts are because those are the ones that are incompatible. So, like, we're not going to focus on the stuff that is like, oh, there's some crossover here and there. We both like eating honey. We both like different foods, this, that, and the other. Like that. That stuff is inconsequential to the consequences of mass immigration. The consequences of mass immigration are going to be those points of dispute. That's why we focus on them.
okay, so I guess specifically mass immigration, like um what's an example of something through mass immigration that you would find objectionable, I guess. Um or part of a culture, I guess, that you would find objectionable or
I mean,
incompatible.
well, I guess would you agree that having a country within a country that is essentially not intermingling with the wider society is probably not the best thing?
Yeah, if that is what's happening, I would say that that would not be like, yeah, that wouldn't be good that wouldn't be good for
Right. So
the
that's
country.
been something that, for example, Sweden just earlier this year were having to contend with. They're I don't know if she's not right wing, that's for sure. She's more of a left leaning prime minister of Sweden right now. Came out and did a speech talking about how we've basically got a separate civilization living within Sweden, and it's caused such great problems for us because when you're having to police a separate civilization using the laws of your own civilization, which are, you know, different, using different languages, all these sorts of, I mean, we see these problems in courts all the time when people get arrested overseas and they can't even speak the language. They don't even know how to navigate the court systems. They get screwed over. So it's bad for both groups. She said it's basically a problem because now you're not just making laws for one people with the same vision for the country. You're having to make laws for multiple groups that are constantly in conflict. And you look at countries like Lebanon, for example, or Ireland, which have had these cultural clashes of people that aren't even that ethnically different, right? They're ethnically very similar, but you've just got in Ireland, you know, Protestants and Catholics, or in Lebanon, like 7,000 different offshoots of different Islamic sects and Christian sects and whatnot. It's so obviously throughout all of history created crisis, whether it was based on immigration or not. And when we're doing it with immigration, the only difference is we're inviting it. We're inviting this discord into our country that we've observed naturally occur in some others when we don't have to.
Okay, so we having immigration happening is not necessarily inviting conflict, right? Again, we're what we are doing is, I think, we're improving the lives of people within our societies and people who are coming from other societies as well, right?
But you're only improving the people in your society if you're adding to the society. If you're creating another civilization within the society that is separate, that's not even communicating with your society, which we, once again, we do see in no-go zones. We do see it's acknowledged by politicians now. It's acknowledged on a broad scale. Canada even call it their official policy, our mosaic. That's not inviting people to add to the culture. That's cutting off your culture and creating a part of your landmass that belongs to a different vision for your nation.
Um, I don't see how this is different from anywhere else in, like, American history, at least. Like, we've been having immigrants for a really long time, coming over for a really long time, and the only difference I can see is I mean,
But
I don't know that.
American immigration 30 years ago, even Canadian immigration 30 years ago, was very, very different than what it is now. And the differences you can see in, once again, when America first came about and was finding its footing in the world, immigrants that were coming over were coming with absolutely nothing of their own volition. They were coming to nothing from nothing sometimes, right? And the only thing they had to rely on was their own damn hard work. It wasn't a system that had um, these massive benefits on a financial level of government support. So you had a very, very different type of immigration occurring. And I don't think it's comparable to what we're seeing today, where immigration is literally being incentivized. In fact, in Mexico right now, the UN are giving cash-based interventions where they're giving money to immigrants who otherwise wouldn't have even been able to make the journey to the US before to come over. So it's an immigration that is occurring because of the state, not in spite of the state. And those are two very different groups of people.
So I have to disagree with you on that. Immigrants who come over to America, regardless of whether they're legal or illegal, in general, pay more into the tax system than they get out of it. It's just
I'd have to see that data because so much of that data is unbelievably skewed because they don't count illegal immigrants because they don't have data on them.
All right, that's fine. But again, I would say I don't think that there's much of a difference in the past and now. People still don't get a whole lot out of coming here and being undocumented even here, right? And even people who are doing it through the legal process are not getting much out of government programs. You're still paying more and paying into the system more than you're getting out of it. As far as like integrating into society, I think I've still yet to see, even with these enclaves you're talking about, I still find it hard to believe that they're not interacting with anybody, not using, and their children are not going out to school, learning English, not interacting with their peers out in the school, interacting outside of their
Well, that's
communities.
what's wild is within these schools, like, for example, I mentioned the Surrey Grunenack area. They've got schools of their own that they've built that are schools that are aligned with their religion, that are schools that are aligned with their culture, that you literally, if you go to school in Surrey today in certain areas, you'll be the only white kid in the entire school, or black kid, whatever your background is if you're not Indian, right? So it's like, it's one thing to say they'll necessarily be assimilated, but my point is they won't if these areas continue to grow, because there's nothing to assimilate to except the culture that has taken over these enclaves.
Okay, yeah, I guess I don't know much about Canadian
This
enclaves
is a
or anything
phenomenon
like
in
that.
Europe too, in some parts of America, but like you said, America has been much better with enforcing the melting pot idea. I know there's areas in Minneapolis that are, I'm not as much of an expert on America as I am Canada and Europe, but if anything, Canada and Europe should be a warning for America not to do this.
No, I mean, I think America just does it better then, if that's the case. Like, it just
Mhm.
seems like maybe other countries just don't do it as well as America. Also, most of the legal immigrants, I also believe, if I'm recalling correctly, uh, don't have access to like most welfare services for the first 5 years they're in America. So the whole idea that these people are not contributing at all, even if, let's say, they don't speak English and they're just working and they're not documented, even if that's the case, they're still contributing more to the economy than they are getting out of it.
That's, well, there's so many things where I wish I could just whisk you away, like the ghost of Christmas past, take you to all of these moments and things I've seen in Europe and Canada. It's like, it's, first of all, it's talking about data amongst illegal immigration is really difficult because, once again, they're illegal, they're not documented, so we're not getting good data on what they're actually up to. If you go to the streets of Paris and you see the illegal immigrants, they're sitting under bridges. They can't work. They don't have the documentation to work. They don't have the ability to do so. They've been sold lies by human traffickers. If anything, I think they're just as much a victim as the people of Europe who are suffering as a result of mass illegal immigration. And they're sitting under bridges, just having to be brought food, causing crime and discord and conflict in communities necessarily, because when you have nothing to do, when you have no money, when you have nothing to lose, you feel you've been lied to, all you're going to do is go and, try to make something of where you're at. And if you're in that position where you have no legal abilities to go forward, you're going to go into the criminal underworld. You're going to start rioting, getting angry with the government, dissatisfied. You look in Mexico, where they've got mass illegal immigration coming from South America. Tapachula have had to shut down their immigration official stations entirely because they had so many riots and people being injured in these riots, where the population has almost increased by a third of illegal immigrants. They're having power outages, they're having water shortages, all of these mass issues that obviously are not being talked about in the media, that none of this is being recorded on statistics because, I mean, it's Mexico. And I know maybe talking about Mexico or other countries dealing with illegal immigration doesn't seem as big a deal as talking about America with illegal immigration, but it is. This is a reality millions and millions, billions of people are dealing with every day. Illegal immigration has been a scourge on the planet for countries. It is not adding to the economy. It is not adding to people's lives, and it is not adding to the illegal immigrants' lives either, but that's not being communicated to them. So they keep making dangerous treks across the world, dying, losing their children, losing their families, thinking that they're about to enter paradise when really they're just going to be sleeping under a bridge somewhere or getting deported in 6 months.
So yeah, I can't speak on Europe, but I can say that like based on data that they've done in the US, that illegal immigrants aren't really like correlated with violent crime. And in
That's
fact,
because they get deported the second they're caught for it. So this is like what's such a funny, I know the study you're talking about where they say that illegal immigrants have lower violent crime rates than the average American. Most criminals in America are what we call frequent flyers. It means when the police encounter a criminal, they're going to be someone that's on their like 50th crime for the most part. They're the frequent flyer person. So if you have an illegal immigrant that is caught for committing a violent crime, they're going to be deported before they commit that 50, 60, 70, 100 crimes. So necessarily, just, even looking at it from a statistical level, they're always going to be lower for violent crime. And this is the problem with like looking at data and reading data, is it can be so misconstrued and so misportrayed.
I don't know if that's the one that I'm looking at here. It just says that results from fixed effects regression models reveal that undocumented immigration does not increase violence. Rather, the relationship between undocumented immigration and violent crime is generally negative. So, I mean, yeah, I can look into it more if you want, but again, and then you're talking about people sleeping under bridges. I don't see how they're taking from the welfare system if they're sleeping under bridges.
If you have people sleeping under your bridges, if you have homeless people always well, it doesn't matter what their ethnic background is. We have streets here, Hastings. I've got freaking family members on there that are a mess, unfortunately. And they're drug addicts, they're homeless, they're always causing problems. This is not even a controversial fact. It doesn't even matter what your cultural background is. If you're homeless, you're going to be a desperate individual. If I were homeless, I would probably be a problem to society because I'm going to be a desperate individual, and desperate individuals do desperate things.
That's contradicting this idea that they're taking from the welfare system then. If they're literally sleeping outside, they're homeless, they're not taking from the welfare system. It doesn't seem like it to me.
But they're still not contributing to the civilization whatsoever.
I mean, if they're spending
and
money
they're probably not as happy as they would be if they actually had a home, if they actually had upward mobility, because they had some sort of identification, they had some sort of ability to contribute to the society around them.
If they're working and they're making some sort of income and spending that income within that economy, they're still contributing to that economy.
Yes, but illegal migrants in many countries either cannot work or find it extremely difficult.
So how are they surviving sleeping under the bridge?
And they can't pay into the tax systems when they're illegal.
By participating in the by participating in the economy, they are still.
No, but they're not paying business tax. They're not paying. They're not paying all these things. Because they don't own a business,
because they're homeless and they live under a bridge. Yeah.
Well, they're not. Okay. The people that I met were not working. If the illegal immigrants that work illegally in the States, they're not going to be paying the same taxes as someone that's legally, putting everything down on paper, obviously. I think there are some people that I'm sure come over illegally and do benefit the system. But overall, starting your foot off illegally, violating the laws of a country is already telling you something about their idea about your nation.
To seek asylum, though, in a lot of places, or to seek asylum.
Is okay. We can't conflate asylum seekers and illegal migrants. They're very, very different groups.
Sure. Okay, that's fine. But I guess we can throw out the whole Islamic thing then, at least, right?
Mm-hmm. I've only got about 15 more minutes too, by the way. Sorry, this has been a.
No, it's fine. I'm gonna be probably in the UK soon, so I'm gonna go.
Will you?
Yeah, I'm gonna go to
join
one of
you
those.
And show you some neighborhoods.
I
think you should hold a gay pride parade in Luton like I did. I think that would be fun.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna see where I can go. I can see. I'm gonna see what places I can go and check out and stuff. So.
Are you gonna be doing like live streaming on the ground there?
I don't know if I'll be live streaming, but I'll.
You should do it. You should do walkabout live streaming. It can be really fun. I've only done it a couple times myself, but get yourself. It's like 100 or 2. You can get ones for 100 on Amazon. They're the Osmo. They're called DJI Osmo, and they'll hold your phone, and you can walk around, and it'll keep it all stable. You'd have a lot of fun doing that.
Cool.
Go to some no-go zones.
Yeah. No, I was thinking maybe I'll go to a no-go zone or something like that. But yeah, it was a good conversation. Maybe we can like have a second one sometime soon or something.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
Or in a
streaming
few weeks or
Monday. I
something.
think I'm speaking to. Do you know Lycan?
I do know Lycan, yeah.
I'm speaking to Lycan. You can feel free to join that stream. We're going to be debating over crime
Oh,
and
okay.
sympathy towards criminals. I think he's got far more sympathy towards criminals than I do. And you'd be welcome to join, and we can have a chat after that as well, since I've got that whole day slated free.
Okay, yeah. I'm thinking, I think it'd probably be better for us to have a conversation after my vacation where I go and I do this stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, go check it out. No, I respect that.
Yeah.
You know, I know there's people in my chat that would super disagree with you, and I disagree with you on this stuff, which is fine. But I think it's really cool the way you approach. I think it's really cool that you're going to go check it out on the ground and then talk to me about it. I find that super commendable.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for having the conversation with me. I'm glad that we can agree that it's not necessarily the religion then. I think we've reached that point, right?
I mean, yeah, there are individuals that are Muslim that I think have integrated really well into the Canadian culture I grew up in. Just unfortunately en masse when we talk about, the Islamic culture within a lot of nations people are immigrating to and the versions of Islam that they're coming from, there are some serious compatibility issues. But referring to it as the local culture is totally a fine description for me as well.
I think like misogynistic cultures are more like the issue for me, but I'm not somebody who's like a fan of a whole. I'm not a fan of religion, but I'm also like not an anti-fan, I guess. So just like kind of neutral on it, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I respect that.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna hop off and read a few last super chats before I get some sleep. Oh my goodness.
Okay.
But
Well,
where can people find you? I appreciate you.
Yeah, youtube.com/Stardust Streams, where I'm slowly migrating over to YouTube more and more. But I'm also on Twitch, twitch.tv/Stardust. So, yeah.
Amazing. All right, everyone go send her some love.
Yeah.
Love a person that we can disagree with, that cares to check it out on the ground themselves and can have a friendly conversation. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you on Monday.
Yeah, see you then. Bye.
All right, have a good one.
All right. Stardust won this by being chill. Thank you. Well, I don't know. What did you guys think? I hope you guys had fun. I had fun. I wasn't expecting it to turn into an immigration debate. Otherwise, I would have had more stats about immigration pulled up. I was just expecting to have like a conversation about Islam itself being an incompatible religion with Western culture. Interesting stuff. Yeah. Good stuff. That was fun.